Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dives episode. I am your co-host Nick Agar Johnson, and with me as always is my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this fine evening?
I'm great, Nick. It's finally we're in the midst of March Madness, so a lot going on, a lot of exciting games, upsets, kind of chalk for the most part. Heading to Sweet 16, shout out the Big Ten for having 7 teams in the Sweet 16. But yeah, I mean, super fun time to be a draft fan and also a college basketball fan.
Yeah, this is the time of the year when people come out of the woodwork who have not been paying, it's funny because we recently talked through as a team sort of, players we're going to profile in the weeks going forward. And I realized we'd already covered a lot of the players who are, key players in March Madness years ago at this point. And then there are people coming out of the woodwork who have no idea who these people are. And, those takes are always interesting, but we welcome all types here at No Ceilings.
Yeah, it's kind of like a family reunion sort of sense. It's like you haven't seen these people in 5-10 years, and then they suddenly just show up, and you're like, I didn't know you were still like in the state or whatever. Like, what have you been up to? And then they're back, and it's like, okay, we got the gang back together. It's just good times. So
Gang back together, and they're all in on Darius Acuff, #1 overall.
Yep. Exactly.
So both the players that we're covering today are still active in March Madness, and the good news is because based on when this episode comes out, no matter what happens in the Sweet 16, they will still be active by the time this episode comes out. So why don't we get into the first of our 2 players right after this? All right, so Paige, your pick for this week was Arizona big man Motiejus Krivas. So why did you decide to go with him for today's episode?
Yeah, I mean, last episode, I picked Liu from Florida, and I guess I just wanted to keep the big man mantra going a little bit. But the reason I picked Mo Krivas too is that he has just been exceptional for Arizona and has been a key piece this year for the Wildcats. Being at one point, the #1 team in the country and only losing 2 games. And of course, they're in the Sweet 16. They play Arkansas this upcoming week. But for those that are, just tuning in to March Madness in the thick of it, Mo Krivas, he's 7'2", 260-pound junior center, 21 years old. He only played 8 games last year. He had a season-ending foot surgery and kind of resurged this year for the Wildcats. He played all 36 games off the bench his freshman year, averaged 5.4 points in 12 minutes, 19 blocks, 78% from the free throw line. This year, he's averaging 10.4 points, 8.2 rebounds, 1 assist on 57.3, 30.8, and 78.2 shooting splits. And man, he's just a big man that, gets it done, right? He's just the key offensive piece for this Arizona Wildcats team that every single player, especially in their starting 5, poses so much threat to the defense, right? And Krivas, which makes him special is that he loves contact and he loves getting blitzed and poised in the post, and he just goes after it and attacks the contact so well. He's a low mistake big man, especially with the ball in his hands on the post. His assist numbers to turnover percentage don't really reflect that, right? But I mean, he is so strong with the ball. He's always there getting extra opportunities, extra possessions. I believe against who do they play? I forget. Not LIU, but Idaho. He had Jaden Bradley missed 2 free throws. He got the rebound on both those missed free throws, put it back up for a foul, and then got another bucket out of it. I mean, he's always in plays. He's always fighting for extra possessions. He just makes everything for the Wildcats team move. And obviously with Karchekov, right? Because he's such a great, excellent, cutter slasher. They play so well off each other. And, he's not really, your point center Jokic type, right? But he is so involved in every single play. And with him, he doesn't really thrive off the pick and roll, right? He's more of like a post up, old school, back to the basket. Because, I mean, Arizona has the top 5 points per game in the paint in the country, right? But on the outside looking in with the modern NBA type of style, right? They're still top 300 when it comes to made 3-pointers in a game, right? So you're looking at a team that is really just going to beat into every single possession, wear you down until the clock strikes zero, right? And Krivas is such a big part of that because, one, he's massive, right? There's not a lot of you can do in the post to stop him because he's constantly moving. He's constantly getting rebounds. He's just a big man that's going to, put the work on you and kind of this old school style, right? I mean, he's not going to shoot threes over you. He's only shot 13 this year. Previous years, he didn't even shoot a three, right? And most of his threes are coming off, pick and pops possessions. The shot clock is, within 5 seconds. Sometimes he's a trailer, right? And he's wide open. So, the defenders aren't going to, guard him out in the perimeter. So he's kind of like, okay, like I'll take my chances and, shoot the occasional three, right? But it's not like he's going to, do that too, right? He's not a pick and pop style big man. He's just that old school, guy, big man, 7'2", 260. That's really just going to run into you, make you work on the post. And, he has that hook floater that I really like too, Nick. And he has that soft touch, soft feel. But I mean, he's not an above the rim type of player, right? He's really just going to take it to you, especially on the post.
Yeah, so I do have some thoughts on the shooting that I want to get back to, but I want to start with one of the first things you brought up, which is the physicality. And I don't want to be too unfair to the Anthony Davises of the world who, insist and insist and insist. No, I'm a four. I'm a power forward because they don't want to play center. Like Kevin Garnett famously referred to himself as 6'13" because he didn't want to be listed at 7'1" because then he's playing center every possession, right? And Krivas is the opposite of that. You mentioned he's 7'2". The 260 is really almost what stands out more than the 7. You're like, he's a big dude, but he's also a bulky big dude. And it's one of those things where there are players who are that size who don't play with all that much physicality. And as you said, he tends to welcome it in a way that makes it really easy to, sort of look at his NBA projection in terms of, okay, what kind of cleanup work do you need me to do? He is one of the rare players who is that size and clearly enjoys the physical element. It's not like, oh, I don't, particularly want to bang in the post on this possession, but, there are two guys hanging on my back and I need to box out, right? It's like he enjoys setting screens. He enjoys that kind of contact. And when you're as big as he is, there aren't that many players, even at the NBA level, who are both that tall and that wide. Like I remember, and this is something I think I've said on the podcast before, but the first time I saw Yang Han-sen in person at Sacramento Summer League, and it's one of those things where it's like, there are guys who are listed at 7'2", 260 or something like that, and then you see them out there and it's like, are you sure he's that? Like, are you sure he's 260? He looks a little skinny. And then there are guys who you see this 260 and it's like, they're probably being kind to him, but it's not like, there isn't much fat, right? It's just he is massive in every way that a human being can be massive. And more than that, it's one thing to know that. It's one thing to have that. It's another thing to be ready, willing, and able to essentially exploit every single one of your physical advantages. And he absolutely does that.
And with him being so welcoming to contact, right, Nick, is that he gets to the line and he converts. I mean, he's career 77% as a free throw shooter. 4.3 attempts this year as a starter in 25 minutes per game. And like he in last year too, and he only played 8 games in the season before his foot surgery, he was still shooting 70%. And he was still getting to the line his freshman year, 3.8 times per game in only 15 minutes. I mean, he is welcoming contact. You're not really going to find a big man that is, that big, that strong, that physical, that is welcoming that contact so he can go to the free throw line. And that's what Krivas does time and time again. And he gets those extra possessions so he can go to the free throw line and convert. 77% as a career and 4.3 attempts. I mean, that's what really drew me to him, Nick, is that with those type of big man archetypes is that, you kind of find those big men that, they're physical, they're powerful, right? They have that baby hook, they have that touch at the rim and that feel. But when they get to the free throw line, you're like, okay, he converts 55%, 60%. He gets to the line, 2 attempts per game. But I mean, Krivas is double that, right? And then obviously from going to, bench player injury to, starter 25 minutes per game. And he makes Arizona, how great they are. I mean, obviously they have Braden Burry, Jaden Bradley, Cole Pete, Kerchaka. I mean, you could go on and on, right, with all the pieces they have. But each player, because they are so talented, they draw so much attention, right? And with Krivas, you know, he's not the best playmaker, right? He can hit the occasional cutter, slasher, kick out, right? But he's also patient and poised. He is strong with the ball. Obviously can finish over, you know, anyone at the rim, right? And then we'll get into obviously his shot blocking, right? But I mean, he's such a force. And I believe like on our last big board too, we had Kerchetkov and, you know, Krivas back to back 46, 47, I believe. So, I mean, this Arizona team is absolutely loaded.
Yeah, and the free throw shooting is a huge element, and that actually leads me to the shooting thing that I wanted to bring up. I think if there's any topic that I have brought up second most behind Sacramento Kings prospects, it's Deron Holmes II. And, you know, with Krivas, the shooting development is very similar to that in the sense of, you know, and I've talked about this plenty of times where, you know, Holmes' first year, he was 1 of 7 from 3. And then his next year, he was taking like 1 a game and hitting him at 30%. But it was really the development of the kinds of threes that he was taking of, oh, okay, this isn't someone who's just, you know, trying to get looks off the dribble. This is someone who is very well aware of the kinds of looks that they would get at the NBA level and then focuses in on those. And with Krivas, you know, again, 4 of 13 from 3 is a sample size that, if not for the rest of his game, I would be very willing to dismiss. But of those threes, he took 5 of them as pick and pops. He took 3 of them in transition, and he took 5 of them spotting up, which, I mean, to me, really what that says essentially is, okay, you know, if they leave me wide open, I'm at least confident enough in my touch that I'm going to start taking those looks. And that's really where the sort of developmental factor comes into play, where, as you mentioned, you know, this guy has shown great touch. I mean, his hooks are beautiful. And also he's got that 77% free throw percentage that makes it very easy to believe that, oh, this is someone who can continue to develop as a shooter, continue to grow as a shooter, and take the kinds of shots that make sense for him to take as a big man. And, you know, the funny part is that he has actually done much better from mid-range on his jump shots, but he's taken 4 mid-range jump shots this year. He's hit 3 of them. So, you know, hey, fantastic. But the idea there being he's not someone who's going to take that shot unless defenses are welcoming. It's like, yeah, go for it. Go ahead, buddy. And
Yeah.
if you can hit them at a 31% clip, that's, you know, not great. But, you know, going back to Deron Holmes II, because I love to do that, the year after he shot 31% on pretty limited volume, he was hitting 38% on, you know, much greater volume. And I don't have the current number in front of me, but last I saw, he was shooting like 42% from 3-point range in his very early career days in Denver, now that he's returned from his ACL tear. And that's the kind of thing with Krivas where, again, you don't worry about him not doing the kinds of big man stuff that you would want him to do. But if he can get to a point where, and this is, I think, a good way to transition to the defense, where if he can be a trail shooter, where it's like, okay, you know, I'm the last line of defense at the rim, right? And as you mentioned, you know, he's not going to be throwing full court outlet passes, right? But, you know, if he gets the rebound, kicks it ahead to the point guard, he's the last guy up the floor, and they just leave him completely open from the top of the key. If you can hit those at, you know, 35, 36%, that's another weapon for him to have. The good news is that he doesn't need that weapon, right? It's just, oh, this would be fun and useful if he could develop it to the point where it's a weapon. But if he doesn't, he's still 7'2", 260, and an absolute menace around the rim on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, and like what you mentioned of him kind of, you know, getting out to the perimeter more and, you know, taking those open looks that he does get as a 3-point shooter is because he does have such good feel and mobility, especially when, you know, he's on the post getting to his baby hook and floater. You know, he loves to go to that off, you know, power dribble, spin move, especially to the left. He loves to get his defenders to the left so he can just rise up over them and convert. And he's also great at teeing up, right? And with, you know, the Arizona team, you know, Kerchetkov, you know, Koa P, obviously that 2-man game there, high-low action. He's great at teeing up, getting into position and converting. And he's also been, you know, better finishing at the rim too. You know, as a freshman, he converted, you know, he was 56% at the rim. Sophomore year, obviously some small sample size with that 8-game sample size, but now he's up to 65% at the rim this year. You know, he's bigger, he's smarter, he's stronger with the ball. He's more confident too. And he's also playing such a key role. And you can see that in every possession that he has. And on synergy too. He's only in the average category on synergy due to putbacks, but I mean, the film says so much more for him in that area, is that he's constantly trying to, get extra rebounds, extra possessions. And in the Big 12 championship game against Houston, I believe they're up by 4 or so, 20 seconds on the clock. He got a huge game-stealing rebound in traffic. I mean, he's getting these rebounds over 3-4 people. He's always surrounded. I mean, the amount of sound bites I heard of, like, Krivas is surrounded, but he, was able to punch it in. I mean, it's time and time again is that he just welcomes the, so greatly, and that he can convert, and you're not ever worried of him, making a bad play or bad shot attempt, right? I mean, he's always poised and controlled and, looking for those extra possessions time and time again.
And we haven't even talked about the defense yet, which is, the most easily projectable part of his profile. But I do want to say one more thing about the offense before we move on, which is he screams Steven Adams to me in a very specific way, which is his rebounding percentage is 19%, which is not fantastic for someone in his size. But if you look at the breakdown, it's like very middling 21.3% defensive rebounding, but 16.1% offensive rebounding, right? This guy's an absolute menace on the offensive glass. And it's the kind of, again, the Steven Adams, Brook Lopez thing of when you're that massive and you have guys like Koa Pete and Braden Burries who could, both rebound and take the ball up the floor, you want those guys to grab the defensive rebounds. And so you have your gigantic human being just box out everybody else, right? And it's one of those things where very early in my basketball journalism career, and I was covering the Nets, and it was one of those things where, Brook Lopez only 5 rebounds a game, 6 rebounds a game. It's like, yeah, but every single year without fail, his teams rebound much better with him on the floor than with him off the floor. And if you watch the games, it's very clear of like, oh, yeah, he's not getting the rebound himself, but that's because every play he's boxing out 2 guys at once so that, his guards or a forward who you trust to take the ball up the floor can grab and go. And, Steven Adams obviously is the sort of ultimate example of that, right? In the Russell Westbrook days. And, even still, he's averaging more offensive rebounds than defensive rebounds most seasons. But that to me is the concept of, oh, yeah, maybe the defensive rebounding rate doesn't look all that impressive, but a lot of it is because he's not asked to grab defensive rebounds as much as he's asked to box out and let Koa Pete grab the defensive rebound so he can take the ball up the floor.
And he's not, stationary in transition either. I mean, he's actively running the floor straight to the basket. He's able to get down there and steal position because he's so big and powerful. And he's great with his feet too, especially laterally, to seal off his opponents and, get an easy bucket. Because when Arizona does play, 4-on-1 offense, right? I mean, they're so good at, kicking it out to Krivas. He's kicking it back out in their ball movement. They're constantly moving, cutting, and he's just so easily adaptable to all that too. And a couple of times too, I mean, he does have, specific design plays for him too, because in this day and age too, it's so rare that coaches, design plays for their big man, especially on a, more consistent basement, not like a one-off, opportunity, right? Sometimes they run this set where, they do a pin down screen, or Krivas sits a pin down screen, then he goes off a curl action to the post, and, they just let him go to work there. I mean, offensively, he's come a long way, especially from his freshman year to now, for sure.
So defensively, this guy is a monster shot blocker. Yeah. And it's, I can say, hey, he's got an 8% block percentage. He's averaging just under 2 blocks a game in 25 minutes. But really, it's one of those things where he's that big and he loves to be that last line of defense of like, oh, you're challenging me. You're coming at me. Come at the king. You best not miss. And, a lot of the value that he provides, again, is like, he's not someone who you're going to run, 20 post-ups a game for, right? And, as you were telling the part about a lot of teams don't, really design plays for their big man, the thing that was just running through my mind was, the old days of the Clippers running the first play of the game for DeAndre Jordan. And then it's like, after that, you're getting rebounds and you're throwing out junks and you're blocking shots, but you ain't getting plays run for you anymore. But, with Krivas, again, it's like all of the offensive stuff is, the kind of gap filling thing that you would really hope that your 7'2", 260 big man does. And, I mean, it's physically tough to be big man, right? It's like you see, basically after every game's like, photos of Nikola Jokic or, any big man you want to name, there are going to be pictures of them post game where it's like Domantas Sabonis famously, like there would be post game pictures and his arm would just be like a mess of like cuts and bruises and just because, it's a physical game, right? And him embracing that is, it's helpful on the offensive end for like, okay, this is, we need someone to set a screen. We need someone to be in the dunker spot, all of those sorts of things. But defensively is where he really shines. And, him being named first team, Big 12 all defensive team, pretty easy, pretty obvious, right? I mean, it's one of those things where, again, for all the gap filling stuff that he does on the offensive end, that's what you would want someone his size to do. Defensively, it's like the thing you want him to do is be an absolute menace in the paint. And look, I don't want him switching onto point guards, but I also don't need him to, right? It's like you don't draft Krivas to, be your switching 1 through 4 guy.
Yeah, I mean, opponents are shooting 31% overall on him, right? 35% at the rim. He's,
wait, sorry, 35% at the rim?
Yeah. Yeah, insane. It's insane.
That's absurd.
And, he's your rim protector, right? And he's also exceptionally good in drop coverage. You're not going to want him to, play off the pick and roll when he's not, in the dunker spot or at the rim, right? You don't want him leaving that space because he has such that big presence, right? And obviously, I mean, he's only letting opponents shoot 35% at the rim at him. I mean, you don't want him to, lure his way out to the perimeter, right? And then against Iowa State, Joshua Jefferson obviously caught him sleeping a couple times on the perimeter, right? It's kind of like the last line of defense, if he's switched out and then he kind of just has to throw a hand up, right? But, especially in transition, when he's the first one back, he makes point guards rethink their decision to go up against him at the rim, especially in transition. And it involves a half court set, which is amazing because that you're not going to want him to, be the point of attack guy on a point guard, right? But if he can do that in transition and that's how he can, defend and switch out onto those point guards, that's good enough, right? For what you want him to do and what his role will be in the NBA, because he does that time and time again. It's not like a one-off scenario where, oh, this one game he did that. That's awesome. But it's like time and time again because the effort's there. He's a high IQ player. He's a smart player. And he's always in, great position as well.
And here's the thing. Normally, I would be sounding small sample size alarm bells about this sort of thing, but he's in the 3rd percentile in terms of possessions defended at the rim. And to me, that is not, oh, he just, got lucky with the offensive players not being able to score around him. No, to me, that screams the Victor Wembanyama, Rudy Gobert thing of, oh, that guy's in the lane? Yeah, I'm not going to bother. Yeah. It's not worth it, right? And it's like that provides an incredible amount of defensive value that never shows up at a box score because how could it, other than looking at, oh, he's in the 3rd percentile in terms of attempts defended at the rim. Nobody's challenging this guy. And when they do, they're hitting 35%, right? So clearly it's not a good idea to challenge this guy.
Yeah. And with him too, I mean, obviously we don't want him on a point guard or switched out on like a 2 or 3, right? But he's an efficient tagger, right? I mean, he'll at least tag in the pick and roll and get back to his spot at the dunker spot and, stay off his opponent. But him just showing flashes of that mobility and him able to, move laterally and that quickness. I mean, he's not a great athlete, right? He's not an above the rim type of player, but at least if he can do that and effectively get back to his man time and time again, it's not a liability, right? I mean, that's good enough for, what he is and what type of player he is. And he shows that, time and time again. And that's a big reason why, Arizona is so good at what they do on both ends of the floor.
Yeah. I mean, he's not, Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren, Kevin Garnett level of mobile 7 foot plus guy, but he's not a stiff either. And that's really all that needs to happen, right? It's like, he doesn't have molasses hips. He doesn't have like those sorts of issues where it's like, oh, I wonder if he can, get up and down the floor. It's just like, he is a really, really big dude. And he, he's quite coordinated for someone his size. And he's, not, again, he's not a mega athlete, but he's also not a stiff. And that's really when you're that big and positioning that well, where you need to be that well. It's like, that's more than good enough for the kind of player he's going to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. It will be interesting come draft night what team, ultimately takes him. Because I think fit for him, it's not as important as some, type of big man archetype, especially with him. I just think he, needs a concept and scheme that works for him because, you're kind of looking at him to, depending on the team, but mostly, coming off the bench and getting you, 20 minutes per game, right? Because of his shot blocking ability and his mobility too on both ends of the floor, and just a big man that can just, clog the lane and not have a lot of people, want to challenge him at the rim is what, he can bring to the table.
And speaking of big men and fit, we've got another very interesting big man prospect coming up. So shall we move into player number 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so I picked a very different kind of center for today's exercise, and I went with Jojo Tugler out of Houston. And he's someone who, anybody who's been following the draft for more than this year has been aware of for a decent length of time. And he is a fascinating player for me to try to figure out because he's not just a pure defense guy, but also it's really just a matter of this guy covers so much ground defensively, fills so many gaps defensively. Can he do enough on the other end of the floor to be worth it? And I think he took a couple of notable steps forward this year in some areas, but even still, that's sort of where the line is going to be. Like, on the one hand, there aren't that many players who are averaging like 1.5 steals and 1.5 blocks per game. And there aren't that many players who, like I would be comfortable switching Tugler to, I mean, really 3 through 5 more than 2 through 5, but like he is someone who you can deploy in a switching scheme. If you have a bigger, more versatile guy around him, then, that makes that whole process easier. But again, I mean, the flip side of it is if you just look at the stat line, you'll see, oh, wow, 100% from 3. It's like, yeah, he took 1 3 and he made it. Congratulations. But really, for me, a lot of the offensive stuff is other developments in his game. And, the biggest one is that he's started to make his free throws in a way, his entire college career. I mean, his first year in Houston, 46% from the free throw line. Last year, 54% from the free throw line. This year, 71%. And that's the kind of thing where I would hope that he continues to improve in terms of his touch, but that's good enough, right? Like 54% and not really much of an offensive game to speak of outside of like 2 feet wasn't really going to be good enough. But, him being a decent enough free throw shooter while also being, I mean, this dude is a crazy athlete, like 97th percentile transition scorer. And, he's someone who has an undersized center kind of skill set, but it's actually really interesting. Other than Krivas, a lot of the bigs in that sort of late first round, early second round range are similar kind of, I mean, we've talked about Zubia Ejiofor on this year podcast, quite recently. And it's a similar sort of deal of if you want someone who is just going to cover every base you could want defensively, while also, by the way, he's shooting 70% at the rim, there's a lot of value in that kind of player. But the problem with it is, again, despite him starting almost every game for Houston this year and, playing quite a significant number of minutes, actually slightly fewer minutes than Krivas, but even still, him being as much of a zero offensively as he is outside of like 3 feet, it's not great. But I cannot get over how special of a defensive prospect he is. And it's the kind of deal where, again, him getting to the point where he's gotten to decent at the free throw line is, I think, good enough for me when, I mentioned the transition numbers. He's also listed as a 97th percentile defensive player. Like, that's what Jojo Tugler is. He covers all the gaps defensively. He switches on to pretty much everybody. If he was 6'11", this dude's probably a lottery pick, right? But he's not. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, what do we do with everything else?
Yeah, I mean, he's in like the 1% of NBA players that have a foot difference between their height and wingspan, right? I mean, he's 6'7" and has an enormous 7'6" wingspan. I mean, he
Nuts.
and you can just tell on the film, like, these dudes' arms are like down to his kneecaps, right? And he covers so much ground, and not to mention he's a freak athlete, right? And especially in this draft class and year, I compare him, athletic wise to Cohen Carr, right? Just because of the above the rim athleticism that he has, and especially in looking at Ament and Asar Thompson as well. I mean, he's just a freak athlete, right? And because he's 6'7", 6'8" with a 7'6" wingspan, he doesn't have a specific position, right? He can be a small ball 5, right, or 3 to 4, and you're kind of like, where do I plug and play this guy? But with the NBA and the modern style of positionless basketball, why wouldn't you want a guy like Jojo Tugler that is such a high outlier player defensively to, play valuable minutes for you? And he's also available, right? I mean, he played all 40 games last year for Houston, right? And he just improved year after year after year. I mean, 20% increase in his free throw percentage from this year to last year. And he's also hitting, 45% off his hook shots, right? I mean, that's basically all his offensive game is in that kind of range, right? But I mean, he's also in the 97th percentile in transition, right? Because he's a freak athlete. He loves to run to the rim. He's not, going to the left or right. He's straight line driving to the rim, And, you have guys like Kingston Flemings, Emmanuel Sharp, Milos Uzan, to set him up in those areas and reward him. And he's always available, right? And speaking of, he has these two-way flashes on the offensive end that you're kind of like, oh, like when they played Arizona or I forget what team, but I mean, he had like 20 points.
Yeah, that was Arizona.
Okay. Because I was going to get to the matchup with obviously Krivas, right? He had 20 points, 10 rebounds, and, Houston was looking like they were going to win that game, right? But Arizona ultimately prevailed and won the Big 12 championship. But last year too, Jojo Tugler won Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year too. And this year too, he has just taken such a big step forward of, I'm like, okay, he does have some touch, at the rim, outside the rim in the dunker spot, right? I mean, he gets to that spin dribble, and because he has just an enormous wingspan, he's able to, finish over guys like Krivas and, challenge them at the rim because he's a strong above the rim athlete. And obviously athleticism can only get you, so far in some instincts, right? If you don't have that offensive bag to, back it up, right? Because, we know he's not gonna, go to the 3-point line and, shoot a 3 over your face or, lure you out to the perimeter, right? But he's going to attack you. And he's also very poised and patient, especially, when he's attacking in that dunker spot range, because he's always looking to kick out to his teammates. Obviously, he's only averaging like assists per game, right? But you see him, connecting the dots in his head, trying to make those extra reads, right? They might not always, convert if you look at his, assisted turnover percentage, right? But you can see, the wheels turning a little bit. And that's a more of a development that I've been watching as his career with Houston has prevailed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There is really, other than the fact that they nominally are both centers-ish, there's really one big similarity in my mind between Tugler and Krivas, which is they have so much offensive talent around them that, they're like, you're not going to be running plays for either of them just because why would you run a play for Krivas when you can run a play for Braden Burries? Why would you run a play for Tugler when you can run a Kingston Flemings Chris Sinak pick and roll or pick and pop or whatever, right? And so, that sort of goes back to what you were saying earlier about, the ways that he can fit in on an NBA roster. And it's one of those things that we've talked about before, and I know we will talk about again, of as the NBA becomes more sort of positionless, a lot of the idea is not as much, okay, we need one point guard, one shooting guard, one small forward, one power forward, one center. It's like, okay, so we need 1.5 rim protectors. We need one switchable defensive guy. We need someone in the dunker spot offensively. We need 4 floor spacers. We need, at least 3 connective passers. Ideally, everybody can make connective passes, but at least 3 different guys who can be, primary, secondary, tertiary initiator types. And, with Tugler, it's the kind of thing where what he does well, every team needs, right? Every team needs someone who can switch across all front court positions and shoot 70% at the rim and be happy not shooting the ball, right? Like continue to, I mean, Tugler plays exceptionally hard, and he plays exceptionally hard despite knowing that he's not going to be all that involved in the offense, and that's fine, right? He's perfectly happy with that, and that's something that a lot of teams value. The flip side, of course, is, what we've teased around the edges of, but is pretty stark in the sense of, I mentioned that he has taken 1 3-pointer and he's hit 1 3-pointer this year. That is literally the only jump shot he has taken this season.
Yeah.
And so, it's one of those things that honestly, in terms of this draft class, I might have thought about this concept more than pretty much any other, which is, have we moved past the pure defense players? And it's, one of those things where, 2-3 years ago in the playoffs, it was like, a lot of the sort of one-dimensional pure shooter types were being forced off the floor because teams would just continuously attack them defensively. Attack. And Tugler is the opposite of that, where it's like, yeah, if your offense is designed to attack Jojo Tugler, you're not going to do great. The flip side is, basically you're playing every offensive possession 4-on-5 because, like, outside of 8 feet, they don't need to mark Tugler in any way, shape, or form. And that, I think, is where just the improved touch that we've seen from his improvement at the free throw line is an encouraging sign for me in terms of, this guy, like, this is, I hate doing this because, but I have to, because otherwise my argument doesn't make sense of, like, he's not Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, right? It's not like there's nothing at all here. He's just his growth at the free throw line tells me, okay, and also, as you mentioned, him being as good as he is on his hook shots, it's like, there's touch here, right? There's reason to believe that, he can be slightly more offensively than he is. And again, it's the kind of thing where, like, I don't want Jojo Tugler jacking up, 25 footers off the dribble, right? That's not, why would you draft him and then have him do that? But the flip side is the dilemma that I'm weighing, with these sort of all defensive types. And spoiler alert, but I have an article in the works about Dame Sarr for Duke. And, it's a very similar idea of
another player we talked about.
There you go.
This year.
But also, the idea there being very simple of, I have no doubts about Jojo Tugler defensively at the next level. Can he do enough offensively? And it's a very different calculus for him versus Sarr, because even though Sarr is actually technically listed as taller, Dame Sarr is, a wing guard type. He's not banging in the paint unless, very, very rarely, whereas Tugler, that's sort of his MO. And on the one hand, that makes it easier for Tugler because, look, you stick him in the dunker spot. You don't have to, have him run connective plays on the perimeter. You don't have to have him be this high-level decision maker. But it's also something that we've talked about in the past of, if you're a big man who can exploit mismatches offensively, if you can't pass out of those post-ups when they swarm you, it's actually harming the offense, right? It's like, okay, this guy's stuck with the ball, we can swarm him and he's not going to be able to make us pay for it, right? And that's where the problem comes in with me. And I think it's a lot easier to be a pure defensive player in the NBA these days than a pure offensive player. And I think it's a lot easier to be a pure defensive big than a pure offensive big. But, the flip side is, I think there's also a lot more reason to have hope in Sarr being more offensively than he's been. Whereas with Tugler, like, we've kind of, this is year 3, right? And, there was a thought last year that he was taking like half a 3 a game. It's like, oh, is he going to take more this year? No, he's taken, again, the one jump shot. And so I do wonder about that, but I'm also kind of in the camp of, he's just so good defensively that he's going to get a shot somewhere. And it's not like he's got, lead hands or he can't finish around the basket. It's just, that's, unless it's wide open, he's not going to shoot it. But also, why would you want him to?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it does it does worry me that he's a below average cutter. Like he's 25th percentile on cuts. That's again, I am worried about that. The fact that he's a 97th percentile transition player really helps with the notion of, yeah, you know what? If it's a half court situation, it is kind of going to be 4-on-5. Maybe he can make up with it with running the court in transition because he does that really well.
Yeah. And he's also 72% on twos in transition too. And the thing with him when I was preparing for this podcast and like deep diving into his film is that he has, that twitch and craftiness to him, right? I mean, he has that wiggle to him that, like, oh, does he have like an offensive bag? Or is he just not showing it, right? But I mean, he's had 3 years at Houston. You see like some possessions of that, but then it kind of just goes back and resets, to Kingsley Fleming's or, whatever the case may be. But I mean, and those possessions, especially late on the shot clock, he does, try some things out, especially with the ball in his hands. But I mean, he's not going to get that at the NBA, right? I mean, his archetype is so hard to project because it could either go amazing or, he might not even get a, cup of coffee. I mean, it just depends what teams value and where he best fits into, right? Because I kind of look at him as, a game changer type of archetype, right? He's a player that, it's game 7 of the Western Conference Finals, and he's going to make a game-changing play for you because of his motor, his skill set, and because of how big of an outlier he is on the defensive end of the ball. But on the offensive end, if it was reversed, you don't want the ball in his hands when it's like a game-winning shot attempt, right? Or even want him to be kind of involved into a scheme, right? Because he doesn't have the assist numbers, right? He doesn't have that extra eyes that are like, okay, let me actually try to get, table set for my teammates, right? He doesn't have that to his game, and it's been 3 years. So it's kind of like, how is that? If he's not trying that stuff now, is he going to try the NBA? Because I don't know if he's going to get the minutes to try that stuff out, right? So it'll be super interesting in the upcoming months, right? Especially after March Madness is over. And I mean, he's going to be an outlier at the combine, right?
Oh.
I mean, we're going to see his numbers, his stats, circulating all over Twitter, right? He's going to be a main point of conversation there, which, we expect, right?
Yes.
But with his archetype, it's so hard because I think you and me, Nick, we like fall in love with these, high motor, game-changing type players that are 6'7" to like 6'9", that have those offensive flashes, but not really. They don't show us too much, but they improve either at the free throw line or they're getting more jumpers off or dribble jumpers, right? But he hasn't shown that in a larger sample size to make me think he has those offensive capabilities yet.
You brought up the Arizona game, and that was a great game for Tugler. I mean, it was literally his season high in scoring.
Yeah.
For me, I think mostly for good, but also the other way, the real sort of banner game for me, if you want to, and again, we at No Ceilings say all the time, don't judge a prospect by their best or their worst game. But if you want to pick one game to really sort of ingest the Jojo Tugler experience, their game against BYU to start off the Big 12 tournament, I mean, he had 12 points, but 5 of his 8 rebounds were on the offensive end. He had 4 assists, 4 steals, 2 blocks. He also had 4 fouls and turned the ball over 4 times.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, a couple of those turnovers were not pretty. And that's sort of the deal, right? Is like, okay, he led the team in assists, right? That was, they were running. More of the offense was touching his hands than it basically ever is. And, he made a few of the basic reads. He, made a few pretty egregious turnovers. He had 4 steals and 2 blocks. He had 5 offensive rebounds, but also, he sort of showed the limitations of his game in terms of, that was not the game where he took his 1-3, right? He's not someone, and, AJ DeBonza didn't have he didn't have an efficient offensive game, but he got to the free throw line 10 times. And part of that was, getting hacked by Tugler, right? He was, again, almost fouled out of that game. But a lot of the good and a lot of the bad with Tugler showed up in that game. And that, I think, is really, among the selling points for him is like he will stuff the stat sheet mostly outside of assists. And that was the one game where he did have a few assists. But you don't get that many big men who can, grab 4 legitimate steals in a game, right? Not like, the like Kingston Flemings or Milos Uzan knocked the ball loose and he just happened to be the guy who picked it up, right? That's not the thing. He is an event causing menace. And, the Arizona game, again, same sort of deal. 7 of his 10 rebounds were on the offensive end. When he's going, especially defensively, that's really not someone you want to be face off against. I've said many times, and I will say many times before, that I think that age is overvalued as a prospect indicator. But Tugler is one of the youngest juniors in the country. He still hasn't turned 21. He won't turn 21 until after the end of the NCAA season, right? He'll turn 21 a couple days after the combine ends. This is, he's not, a 23-year-old redshirt junior who, transferred twice and, name your long list of reasons that someone could be, a much, much older prospect than you think they are. But that's not the case with Tugler. And again, it's sort of a similar thing, right? Where even in his freshman year, it was like, this guy can be special defensively, but when he's shooting 46% from the free throw line, it's a lot different of a calculus than now that he's at a point where he's good enough and also shooting 70% at the rim, where it's like, you're fine with him taking those shots around the basket. It's just anything outside of 3 feet that's a problem. But getting to a point where you want him taking those shots from 3 feet, that's actually a pretty significant developmental improvement from him to get to the point where it's like, yeah, we're happy if he, has the ball in his hands around the basket because he's getting fouled a decent amount and he's actually hitting his free throws, which he wasn't earlier in his career.
Yeah, and I think now too, his junior season with Houston, right, is that he's so much stronger with the ball and confident of, letting those shots go that he didn't, his freshman, sophomore year, right? And he's converting obviously at a much higher rate, which is like, okay, there's something to work here a little bit. There's not, all hope is not lost with Jojo Tugler on the offensive end, which is a great sign, obviously, as he enters, the draft, right? But you mentioned kind of like against BYU, the Jojo Tugler experience. I mean, one of his turnovers that I remember vividly is that he just completely misread, I forget who was cutting, but just a play that was, they came out of timeout. You would think, everyone knows what they're supposed to do, right? And he, I forget, I think it was Uzan was cutting or whatever, and he just, sailed the ball out of bounds, right? And that's kind of the experience with him, right? Just missing those reads that, you're not a high assist type of playmaker, right? But that's your chance to show that you have some juice there. And he has 44 assists to 45 turnovers this year, but he has 2.8 stocks per game, right? So it's kind of like you're getting the whole experience with him throughout the season. And that was just one of the plays where I'm like, that was one of his times to, shine, show me a little bit something that they've been working on. But especially on the defensive end, just going into the numbers a little bit more here before, we transition to quick hits. Opponents are shooting 27.8% on him on all field goal possessions, 33.3% at the rim. I mean, this guy is just a ball hawk, right? He's just a ball tracker, and especially in transition too, when he's kind of like a cheetah, right? in free range, stalking his prey, and he's gonna time it perfectly at the rim, right? He's gonna get you right as you're about to think you have an easy bucket or easy dunk or whatever. I mean, and he's going to block you because that's what he does. And I mean, the 7'6" wingspan, I mean, I keep talking about it, but it's so apparent. And that's what is the intrigue with him, right? Is that he isn't your typical, big man, right? But he can fit that role because of his athleticism, his motor. He's a high IQ player. And he also has, the ground coverage for it too, right?
Yeah, before we go to quick hits, I just want to say quickly, last week when we were talking about how awesome it was that Chris Sinak was limiting shooters to 45% around the rim, that's a normal number for a great defensive big man. These mid 30% numbers are insane, like outliers of outliers of outliers of outliers. It's like, look, neither Krivas nor Tugler is going to allow 35, 33% around the rim at the NBA level because Wembanyama doesn't allow those kinds of numbers, right? Nobody gets away with that kind of thing at the NBA level. But the fact that those numbers are what they are is absolutely insane. And yeah, I mean, the wingspan thing is a huge part of the Tugler experience, right? Like, he makes up for a lot of being undersized by just having absolute condor arms. And, it shows up in the shot blocking. It shows up in the steals numbers in terms of him just being able to get into and disrupt passing lanes. I have always wondered about guys with that kind of crazy outlier wingspans of like, is it actually significantly harder to shoot? But, Mikal Bridges is kind of a one person example of how that isn't necessarily the case. But it is something that I've thought about before. But with Tugler, again, you're not going to ask him to shoot those shots, and he's not going to take them, right? It's there are quite a few, and one in there are many, but examples of guys who are big men who are like, I want to take jump shots, I want to be a sort of floor spacer, like going all the way back to Elvin Hayes, right? It's like, I don't care that I'm big, I want to take fadeaway jumpers. It's really good for Tugler's projection, that he's not that type of player. But there's a whole wide gulf between I'm taking turnaround jumpers when I should just be putting my shoulder into guys and getting to the rim. And yeah, I took one jump shot all year long. Yeah. And so hopefully he can find a sort of happy medium between those two. But I've said it so many times, and I keep going back to it of he's such a special defensive player that as long as you get 4 competent offensive players who can shoot around him, he's going to be a valuable player. And again, just absolutely, as you mentioned, I could very well see him like 2 years into his career, he's the 8th man for some team and they bring him in with 5 minutes to go and he just absolutely shuts down the offense and then gets a putback dunk to win it. Like that is absolutely in the cards for Jojo Tugler.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I could see him easily being, a fan favorite for any team, right? Because you're going to love him when he's on the floor and you're going to obviously miss him when he's not, especially on the defensive end. Kind of like, the Josh Harts of the world, right? Yeah. And he's that type of player and archetype that, people just fall in love with. And as a coach too, and a coaching staff, you fall in love with because, he has a work ethic. Obviously, he plays for one of the most, best coaches in the world, right, with Kelvin Sampson, right? So he has that mentality, and he's strong-willed too, and I think at the next level that's gonna be apparent for any team that wants to take a shot with him.
All right, shall we go ahead and move on to quick hits?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we are recording this a couple days before, but the episode will come out right before we get into Sweet 16 games. And so obviously that is the topic around both college basketball and the draft space. So why don't we talk about some of our favorite potential prospect matchups in the Sweet 16?
Yeah, one of my favorites, probably a lot of people's favorites, right? But Illinois-Houston. Keen Wagler, Kingston Flemings. I'm ready for them to go at each other, right? And I think with that region too, it's a Final Four matchup in a sense, right? If it was any other region, you could see them in the Final Four easily. But I think that's going to be a big one Thursday night, late again. These late slate games, last night as well. Games are getting over at like 1 or 2 in the morning on the East Coast, but 10:05 p.m. 7 for you, Nick.
I was about to say it helps to be in California for these.
Yeah.
It's not as fun when it's a 4:00 game, but
Yeah, no, that one I'm super excited for because I think, Illinois has a lot to prove, right? But Houston, I think, obviously has more, right? Because they were that close to winning national championship last year against Florida. Obviously, Emmanuel Sharp, made that turnover at the end that, cost them a title. But I think this is a game to watch, right? And I wish it wasn't so late, but I'll for sure be up watching. And then obviously another one too, Arkansas, Arizona. I think that's a primetime game, right? Darius Acuff. I think this is a big game, obviously, for Coach Cal too. If he can, get over the hump, especially with a new team, right? Yeah. So I think that's a great one too. Obviously, our guy Billy Richmond too. I'm excited for that one to see how he goes against Koa Pete. Obviously, Krivas, right? Karchakov. I'm super excited for that one too.
Took a lot of restraint for you to not say Cone Carr Braylon Mullins, so I appreciate that. And then, of course, I screwed up his name as I was trying to say it. clearly the big two for prospect matchups are the two you mentioned in Wagler, Flemings, and Acuff, Burries. Those are,
Yeah.
I mean, those are going to be electric. And, obviously, guy we mentioned in Krivas, guy we mentioned in Tugler, covered in those games as well. I am very curious to see what Cam Boozer Zubia Giafor looks like in
Yeah.
the Duke St. John's game, because I still am holding on to all of my Cam Boozer stock. This has not been the best tournament for him.
Mhm.
Certainly the opening game was not pretty in a whole number of different aspects, but at this point, he's the only top 4 guy still in the tournament.
Yeah.
And, he's going up against someone in a Giafor who, as incredibly versed as Cam Boozer is in using his bulk on both ends of the floor, honestly, but particularly offensively, Zuby is not someone who's going to back down at all. And, they also have another deep ass guy in Dylan Mitchell who can provide that sort of size and athleticism as a weak side shot blocker as well. Duke has absolutely destroyed in the paint for the tournament, and that's basically how they've managed to stay alive. Like, that was how they managed to stay alive against Siena, other than the fact that Siena played all five guys the entire game, and as human beings, they got exhausted by the end. That kind of happens, but I'm very curious to see what that looks like. Slightly more of a sort of draft Nick hipster kind of pick, but I do want to see what Michigan Alabama looks like,
Mhm.
and particularly I want to see Yax and Amari Allen, because I think those guys are probably going to be cross matched on each other, and they are two of the greatest skeleton key kind of players in this draft class. It'll be really interesting to see how they sort of match up against each other. And I have staked my claim on LeBaron Philon Island for quite a while. And so seeing what he can do against that Michigan front line. I mean, challenging Ademar, Merez Johnson, and Yax at the rim is not a fun challenge for anybody. But I mean, Philon has passed every test that anybody could have, asked for him to pass at this point, and it'll be interesting to see what that matchup looks like. I mean, in terms of the rest of the rosters, I don't think anyone would dispute that Michigan has a pretty clear advantage, but I am very interested to see what Philon looks like against that kind of top tier defensive front court.
I think, obviously, I don't think Alabama's going to shoot how they did last night, right? I mean, they made 19 3-pointers. I believe it's like the third most made 3-pointers in March Madness history. I mean, they were just electric. And I don't think anyone thought they were going to win that big against Texas Tech. But I think Alabama can be a threat to Michigan, right? I think they'll keep it, in range, right? I ultimately think Michigan will win that matchup, but I think it's a game that, Michigan fans should be a little weary of, just because of how hot they can get, especially beyond the arc. And I also think Amari Allen, Merez Johnson will be a good matchup as well. And then St. John's Duke. A lot of people are, rooting against Duke just because of how they
really. People don't like Duke?
And I think I'm kind of in the middle spot there. I mean, I think that's going to be a very telling matchup. And I think, obviously with the veteran-led, Rick Pitino squad, right, against, a lot line on Duke this year, coming out of that region too. I think, the region with Duke, St. John's, UConn, Michigan State is, the hardest region to come out of just from that sense. But, I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun this weekend, Nick, so I'm excited.
You mentioned Amari Allen against Merez, and I'm very curious, again, because whether it's Merez or Yax, it's going to be a very interesting test, but it's going to be a very different test depending on which of those two guys he's spending most of the night on. Maybe they'll flip him. I mean, that's the kind of thing. We don't need to go into this Michigan team with you on the pod. Maybe if Metcalf or Rowan were here, we might want to, go into a bit more detail, but we can sort of elide that for now. But yeah, I mean, it's that time of year where, as the field starts to narrow, we see in most years, a lot of the top players, still trying to prove themselves and compete. And again, it's very interesting that of the top 4, it's only Cam Boozer left. But basically everybody from like the 5 through 15 range on my board is still playing. It's just like AJ's out, Darren Peterson's out. Caleb Wilson obviously was never going to be playing in the tournament, but also the UNC is no longer in the tournament anyway, so it doesn't make much of a difference. But, again, you mentioned like Akov Burries, that's the kind of thing where it will make a lot of difference in who's in that sort of next group up after what is pretty close to consensus top 4 at this point. And it could very well be that, whichever of the top tier guards still remaining in the tournament goes the farthest, they might be able to make a lot more noise when it comes around to draft season.
Yeah, and especially, in March, the guard play is so prominent, right? And so important. And I think, for just going back to Duke St. John's real quick, I think obviously Patrick Ngumba is back, right? I mean, he only played 12 minutes against TCU. He had 4 points, 4 rebounds, right? But I think it will be a big test for him too, and how he shows up, right? And I think he might be the X factor there, because obviously Cam Boozer is going to be swarmed, right, by the St. John's defense of, you got Dylan Mitchell, you got Bryce Hopkins, you got Zubi Ejiofor. I mean, that front line, it's going to be an ultimate test, but I'm super excited for that matchup too.
All right. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap this one up?
Yeah, all good.
Cool. So she is Paige Otto. You can find her on social media at Paige Otto _. You can find me on social media at NBA Johnson. We have a very special episode planned for next week, so be sure to tune in for that one. It will hopefully be a lot of fun, as long as Paige can put up with me for the entirety of that episode. We'll see how that goes. Fingers crossed. But in the meantime, you can check out our written work over at noceilingsnba.com. If you're listening to the podcast, please leave a rating and or a review. 5 stars, always much appreciated on our end in whatever podcast player you might be using. And we are also on YouTube, so check us out there, No Ceilings NBA. And the episode will be up on YouTube or on the podcast player for whichever one you prefer. We make that choice very easy for you to make. And if you've been enjoying the deep dives portion of the No Ceilings NBA draft show, feel free to reach out to us either via social media, or you can shoot me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.